The first person who told me my life savings were gone wasn't my mother. It wasn't my brother. It was a bank fraud investigator who quietly asked, "Miss Genevieve Fernandez, did you authorize 5 transfers totaling $184,000? I hadn't touched my account in days, so why did the records show my electronic signature? Why had my recovery email been changed overnight? And why did every transfer end in accounts connected to my own brother?" Before I could even process it, the investigator added, "Please don't call your family yet. Someone already knew we'd be contacting you. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, I'd genuinely love to know where you're joining from. Tell me your country and what time it is where you are right now. And if stories about family truth and standing up for yourself speak to you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed with me for the rest of this journey." 3 months before that phone call, I thought I finally understood what stability felt like. At 34, I had spent more than a decade building a career that rewarded caution instead of risk. I worked as a senior financial compliance analyst for one of the largest healthcare networks in Columbus, Ohio. My job wasn't glamorous, but I genuinely enjoyed it. Every day I reviewed financial controls, investigated irregular transactions, and helped make sure millions of dollars moved exactly where they were supposed to. My coworkers joked that I noticed details other people walked right past. They weren't wrong. Ironically, that same habit deserted me when it came to my own family. Growing up, my mother, Patricia Fernandez, always described me as her easy child. "Genevieve never asks for much," she'd tell relatives during Thanksgiving dinners. "She's always been independent." Everyone smiled whenever she said it. I used to smile too. It sounded like a compliment. It took me years to understand that being the easy child often meant being the child people expected to carry disappointment without making anyone uncomfortable. My older brother Adrian had always been different. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 new friends and 2 business opportunities. People naturally liked him. He was funny, confident, and genuinely generous when things were going well. Unfortunately, things rarely stayed that way. After high school, Adrian started a residential remodeling company. For several years, everything looked promising. He bought a pickup truck, hired employees, and constantly talked about expanding into commercial construction. Then the housing market slowed. A few contracts fell apart. Several clients delayed payments. Instead of shrinking the business until things improved, Adrian doubled down. He borrowed more money, bought more equipment, signed bigger leases. Every setback convinced him that one more investment would solve everything. It never did. Whenever another financial problem appeared, my mother somehow found a way to soften the landing. Sometimes she loaned him money. Sometimes she co-signed another loan. Sometimes she convinced relatives to help Adrian get back on his feet. She never called it rescuing him. She called it believing in him. By contrast, nobody ever worried about me. I graduated from college with scholarships, worked while earning my master's degree, paid off my student loans 5 years early, and avoided credit card debt almost obsessively. Whenever I received a raise, I increased my savings instead of my lifestyle. Friends teased me for driving the same reliable Honda Accord for nearly 10 years. I never cared. Every dollar had a purpose. 2 years before everything happened, I bought a modest condominium on the north side of Columbus. When the local housing market surged unexpectedly, I sold it for a substantial profit. After paying taxes, closing costs, and the remaining mortgage balance, I deposited nearly $184,000 into a high-yield savings account. That money represented something far bigger than a number. It represented freedom. I had already been working with a real estate agent, quietly looking for a small craftsman-style home with a backyard, a home office, and enough space to someday adopt the dog I'd wanted since childhood. I didn't tell many people. Buying a house felt too personal to announce before it became real. The only reason my mother knew was because she asked. Actually, she asked a lot. The first conversation happened over Sunday dinner. "So," she said while pouring iced tea into my glass, "are you still planning to buy another place?" "I am. Have you started looking?" "A little. You've always been careful with money." "I try." She smiled warmly. "I'm proud of you." Nothing about that exchange seemed unusual. A week later, she called while I was driving home from work. "I was talking to one of my friends," she said casually. "She got locked out of her online banking." "That sounds frustrating. Do you still use that same bank?" "I do." "They've always treated you well?" "Yes." "Good." Then she changed the subject. I barely thought about it afterward. Another couple of weeks passed. We met for lunch near her church. Halfway through our sandwiches, she asked another innocent question. "When you finally buy your house, will the bank wire the money directly from your savings?" I laughed. "I haven't even picked a house yet." "I know, I'm just curious." "You've never cared about real estate before." She shrugged. "I guess I'm getting old." Again, I didn't think much of it. Looking back now, I wish I had. Around that same time, Adrian also started acting differently. He texted more often, asked me to grab coffee, sent me funny videos, checked in after work. It actually felt nice. For years, our relationship had revolved around family holidays and birthday dinners. Suddenly, he seemed interested in having a real sibling relationship. One evening, we met at a sports bar downtown. He looked tired. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. "You've been working too hard," I told him. He chuckled. "Trying to stay ahead." "Business getting better?" "It will." That answer sounded rehearsed. A few minutes later, he leaned back in his chair. "You still use that banking app on your phone?" I looked at him. "Yeah. I keep forgetting my passwords." "You're lucky you're organized." "I use a password manager." "Smart." Then he changed the subject before I could ask why he wanted to know. At the time, I assumed he was making conversation. Now I know better. The strangest moment happened about a month before the investigator called. My mother came over to my apartment carrying a box of old family photographs. "I found these while cleaning," she said. We spent nearly 2 hours laughing over faded birthday pictures, awkward school portraits, and vacations from decades earlier. As she prepared to leave, she stopped beside the bookshelf in my home office. "Is that your old laptop?" I looked over. The silver laptop had been sitting untouched for years. "It barely works." "My computer's acting up," she said. "Would you mind if I borrowed it for a few days? I only need it to print a church newsletter." I hesitated. "It's slow." "I don't mind." Honestly, I was relieved to get rid of it. It had no sentimental value, and I planned to recycle it eventually. "Sure," she smiled. "You're always helping me." Those words stayed with me much longer than they should have. A few days later, she returned the laptop. "I think I finally figured out my printer," she said. I plugged the computer back into the closet without even opening it. That decision would haunt me later. Around the same period, another odd thing happened. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was reviewing compliance reports at work, my phone buzzed. The notification preview read, "Password reset request received." Before I could unlock my phone, another notification appeared. Then both disappeared. I frowned. During lunch, I searched my inbox. Nothing. No password reset email, no security notification, nothing in deleted mail. I even wondered if I had imagined it. When I got home that evening, I logged into my banking account. Everything looked normal. My balance hadn't changed, no suspicious transactions, no alerts. I convinced myself it had been a software glitch. The next morning, I completely forgot about it. Standing in the bank months later, listening to Rachel Mitchell explain how sophisticated account takeovers usually begin, that forgotten notification suddenly returned to me with perfect clarity. My stomach tightened. because for the first time I realized that disappearing password reset email hadn't been a glitch at all. It may have been the first moment someone tried to unlock my entire future. Rachel Mitchell didn't begin our meeting by showing me documents. She began by taking away the shame I didn't even realize I was carrying. "I want you to understand something before we look at any evidence," she said, folding her hands neatly across the conference table. Victims of account takeovers often believe they should have seen the warning signs. Most of them couldn't have, not until the investigation reconstructs the timeline. That sentence settled something inside me. Since her phone call that morning, I had replayed every financial decision I'd made over the past year. I kept wondering if I had been careless. Whether I'd clicked the wrong link, opened the wrong attachment, trusted the wrong website. Rachel seemed to recognize that spiral immediately. "Our job isn't to ask why you were fooled," she continued. "Our job is to determine exactly how someone gained access." The conference room was surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic screens, no detectives pacing around. Just a rectangular table, 2 laptops, a wall-mounted monitor, and a stack of neatly organized folders. Across from Rachel sat a digital security specialist named Aaron Wells. He looked to be in his early 40s, wore wire-frame glasses, and spoke with the careful precision of someone who measured every word before saying it. Rachel slid a folder toward me. "Let's start with your online banking profile." Inside were printed screenshots of my account settings. The first page looked familiar. The second did not. Someone had changed my recovery email address. It wasn't an address I'd ever seen before. The change had occurred 53 days earlier. I stared at the timestamp. "That's impossible." Rachel nodded. "It surprised us too." "I would have received a notification." "You did?" I looked at her. "Our records show your original email received the notification. But I never saw it." Aaron spoke for the first time. "You probably saw it briefly." "What do you mean?" He turned the monitor toward me. "When someone requests a password reset, the system sends an email automatically. If that email account is already compromised, the message can be deleted almost immediately." My stomach dropped. "The notification on my phone," Rachel nodded. "The one you told me about earlier." "I thought it disappeared." "It probably did." Aaron zoomed into a timeline. "The notification appeared because the message reached your inbox. It disappeared because someone removed it seconds later." For several moments, nobody spoke. I remembered standing in my office cafeteria that afternoon, wondering whether I'd imagined the notification. I hadn't. Someone had erased it before I could open it. Rachel continued. "The password itself wasn't the beginning." She pointed farther back on the timeline. "The recovery email changed first. Then another screen appeared. Multi-factor authentication. The security code that normally would have gone to me had been redirected." I frowned. "I never approved that." "No." Rachel paused. "Someone else did." Aaron displayed another chart. This sequence wasn't random. He highlighted each step. "First recovery email. Click. Then authentication settings. Click. Then trusted device registration. Click. Finally, the transfers." Everything had happened over nearly 2 weeks. Slowly. Patiently. No large withdrawals. No dramatic activity. 5 separate transfers. Each under the bank's internal review threshold. Each spaced days apart. I leaned back. They knew exactly how to avoid attention. Rachel met my eyes. "Yes." That single word frightened me more than anything she'd said all morning, because it suggested planning, not panic, not opportunity, planning. Aaron opened another file. "Now we'd like to discuss identity verification." Every time someone calls the bank requesting major account changes, they're asked several security questions. Mother's maiden name, first pet, first elementary school, City where you were born. Nothing unusual, except every answer had been correct. Perfectly correct. Not guessed, known. Rachel watched my expression. How many people know those answers? I laughed once. It wasn't humor. My family. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she asked another question. Did you ever write those answers down? No. Store them in the password manager? No. Tell friends? No. I rubbed my forehead. My mother knows all of them. So does my brother. Aaron quietly added, and whoever contacted customer service? Rachel slid another document across the table. Customer service verification log. 3 separate calls, different days, different representatives. Each call lasted less than 10 minutes. Each ended with another security change. I looked at the phone number used. It wasn't mine. It was a prepaid cellular number purchased only a few months earlier. So they didn't even use their own phone? Rachel nodded. Correct. Aaron enlarged another page. This interests us even more. Browser fingerprints, device identifiers, login history. At first, the information looked like meaningless strings of numbers. Aaron explained patiently. Think of it like a digital fingerprint. Every computer leaves small identifying characteristics when it connects. He highlighted 2 login sessions. This device accessed your account repeatedly. He opened another window. The same device also accessed another online account shortly afterward. What account? He hesitated. Your mother's online utility account. I looked at him. What? We obtained that information through legal process. I stared at the screen. You're saying the same computer logged into both? Yes. I tried to think logically. My mother owned her own desktop computer, so why would the same device appear on both accounts? Then something surfaced in my memory. The old laptop, the one she'd borrowed. Aaron seemed to read my face. Something just occurred to you. My old laptop. When was that? I told them everything. The photo albums, the church newsletter, borrowing the laptop, returning it a few days later. Rachel wrote several notes. Did you erase the browser before lending it? No. Did you save passwords in that browser years ago? I honestly don't remember. Aaron looked at Rachel. She looked back at him. Neither needed to speak. I suddenly understood. The laptop I'd considered worthless might have contained exactly what someone needed. Saved usernames, cookies, browser autofill, maybe even password hints. Enough information to begin reconstructing access. Rachel didn't jump to conclusions. She simply asked, did anyone else have access to that computer after it came back? No. Have you turned it on recently? I haven't touched it. Aaron closed his laptop. I'd recommend not using it until our forensic team examines it. Rachel continued. There is one more item. She opened a sealed envelope, but didn't hand me its contents. 3 customer service calls were recorded. Okay? We routinely record those calls. I nodded. She looked almost reluctant. Our analysts noticed something. What? The caller's voice. Silence settled over the room. Rachel chose every word carefully. I'm not saying we have a positive identification. My heartbeat quickened. But the voice bears significant similarities to your mother's. The room suddenly felt much smaller. No. Voice similarity alone isn't evidence, Rachel said quickly. It's simply an observation. I stared at the tabletop. My mother, the woman who packed my lunches for school, the woman who stayed awake when I had pneumonia, the woman who cried at my college graduation. I couldn't make those memories fit beside the sentence I'd just heard. Rachel let the silence breathe. Finally, I whispered, Can I hear it? I'm afraid not. Why? Not until the investigation reaches the appropriate stage. I closed my eyes. Part of me desperately wanted the recording. Another part prayed I would never hear it. Rachel gathered the folders. I know this has been overwhelming. It has. But I don't want you focusing only on the recording. I looked up. It isn't the strongest evidence. It isn't. She slowly pushed one final folder toward me. The recording may suggest who made the calls. I glanced at the unopened folder. What does this one show? Rachel's expression changed. This one explains why we believe someone inside your family knew far more about your finances than you ever realized. I reached for the folder, suddenly afraid of what was waiting inside. I didn't open the folder immediately. For several seconds, my hand simply rested on the cover while Rachel and Aaron quietly waited across the table. Finally, I took a slow breath and lifted it open. The first page wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a transfer record. It was a timeline. Across the top, someone had typed personal information exposure events. Below it were dates stretching back almost 6 months. Rachel pointed to the earliest entry. These are moments when information about your account's identity or finances appears to have been gathered. I frowned. Gathered? We don't believe the account takeover happened overnight. She tapped the paper gently. We believe someone spent months collecting pieces. I leaned forward. The first entry made no sense. January 12th, mailing address updated with employer. The 2nd. February 3rd, property sale completed. The 3rd. February 6th, deposit confirmed. My pulse slowed. None of those events were private. Someone close to me could have known every one of them. Rachel continued. Notice the pattern. Every milestone connected to my savings appeared only days before another change involving my online account. It wasn't enough to prove who had done it, but it proved something else. Someone had been paying attention to my financial life long before the money disappeared. Aaron slid another photograph across the table. It showed my old silver laptop. Our forensic team would like permission to examine this. I still have it. Good. What are you looking for? Saved browser credentials, autofill information, cached authentication cookies, anything that might explain how someone bypassed normal security. I nodded immediately. Take it. Rachel smiled faintly. Thank you. The meeting ended less than 20 minutes later. Before I left, Rachel reminded me of one thing. Continue living normally. I almost laughed. I'm not sure I remember what normal feels like. I know. She handed me her card. If you discover anything, even something that seems insignificant, call me. I will. And Genevieve, I looked back. Please don't confront anyone until we understand the full picture. I promised her I wouldn't. I intended to keep that promise, at least for a while. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house for lunch. If someone had watched me pull into the driveway, they would have thought it was another ordinary family visit. That was exactly what I wanted. When my mother opened the front door, she smiled as warmly as always. There's my girl. She hugged me. I hugged her back. For a split second, I wondered if Rachel was wrong. Maybe there had been some impossible mistake. Maybe all this evidence pointed in the wrong direction. Then my mother asked, "Everything okay at work?" The question itself wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was how carefully she watched my face while asking it, almost like she was searching for something. I forced a smile. Busy as always. Good. She seemed relieved. Relieved. That tiny reaction lodged itself in the back of my mind. Adrian arrived about 15 minutes later. He looked exhausted. His beard had grown in unevenly. His expensive watch was gone. Even his pickup truck wasn't parked outside. Instead, he arrived in a rideshare. I noticed immediately. He noticed me noticing. Truck's in the shop, he said, before I even asked. Everything okay? Yeah. His answer came too quickly. Lunch passed with surprisingly normal conversation. Television, weather, church fundraiser, my mother's tomatoes refusing to grow. No one mentioned money. No one mentioned banks. No one mentioned Adrian's business. It almost felt rehearsed. After we finished eating, my mother carried dishes into the kitchen. I'll wash these. I'll help. No, she smiled. You visit too little already. Go relax. Instead, I wandered toward the hallway. Their house hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same framed family photographs, the same grandfather clock, the same scent of lemon furniture polish. I stopped outside the small storage room near the garage. Its doors stood slightly open. Inside were old holiday decorations, filing boxes, and shelves packed with paperwork. Normally, I wouldn't have looked inside. This time, something caught my eye. A bright red envelope partially sticking out of a cardboard file box. Across the front appeared bold black letters. Final notice. I glanced toward the kitchen. Running water, my mother humming softly. I stepped inside. The envelope wasn't addressed to my mother. It was addressed to Adrian. Inside were collection notices, past due business loans, missed commercial lease payments, equipment financing. One letter stated the lender intended to pursue legal action if payment wasn't received within 10 days. Another warned that personal guarantees could soon become enforceable. Personal guarantees. Rachel's words echoed inside my head. Someone had been desperate, very desperate. I carefully slid every document back exactly as I'd found it. Then I noticed something sitting on the shelf beside the box. A spiral notebook. Nothing unusual. Until I recognized my mother's handwriting across the cover. Bills. Curiosity overcame guilt. I opened it. Page after page contained payment reminders. Mortgage. Utilities. Insurance. Medical appointments. Then another section began. Adrian. Equipment loan. Commercial loan. Credit line. Payment due. Past due. Grace period. My mother had tracked every debt by hand. Entire pages were devoted to Adrian's financial problems. Some entries were circled 3 or 4 times. One note stopped me cold. Need money before April. Cannot miss another payment. There was no dollar amount, no explanation, only those words. I quietly closed the notebook. As I turned to leave, something yellow caught my attention. A sticky note had fallen between 2 folders. It contained several short lines, not complete passwords, not account numbers, fragments. Pet name, high school mascot, birth city. I stared at it. Those weren't random reminders. Those were pieces of security questions. The exact kinds of questions Rachel had shown me 2 days earlier. My heartbeat quickened. Before I could think further, footsteps approached. I quickly placed the note back where it had been and stepped into the hallway. My mother smiled. There you are. I was looking for the bathroom. She laughed. You've known this house for 30 years. I guess I wasn't paying attention. If she suspected anything, she hid it well. When I left that afternoon, I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I stopped at Evelyn Brooks' house. Mrs. Brooks had lived next door since before I was born. She had watched Adrian and me ride bicycles, graduate from school, and leave home. She still baked peach cobbler every Sunday. When she opened the door, her face lit up. Genevieve, I hope I'm not interrupting. Never. We sat on her porch drinking iced tea. For nearly half an hour, we talked about ordinary things. Then she casually mentioned something that made me sit perfectly still. Your mama finally got that old computer working. I blinked. What computer? The little silver one. My old laptop. That's the one. I thought she only borrowed it for a few days. Oh, honey. Mrs. Brooks looked puzzled. I saw her using it several afternoons. Several. I thought it was just for printing. She frowned. No. I'd wave from my porch and she'd be sitting by the dining room window typing away. A strange chill crept across my shoulders. Do you remember when... Oh, she thought for a moment. It was around the time those construction trucks stopped coming to Adrian's place. That would have been the same month my password reset notification disappeared. I thanked her and headed back to my car. Halfway home, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. For the first time since Rachel's phone call, I allowed myself to cry. Not because my savings were gone, not even because the evidence kept pointing toward my mother. I cried because every new discovery forced me to question another memory I had always believed was built on love. When I finally wiped my eyes, I opened the photograph I'd quietly taken of one document before leaving the storage room. It was the first collection notice addressed to Adrian. This time I read every line slowly. Near the bottom in small print was the total outstanding balance. I checked it twice because I thought I'd misread it. Then a third time. My family had always said Adrian was struggling with around $80,000 in debt. The document told a completely different story. His total obligations exceeded $320,000, and suddenly I understood why ordinary desperation had turned into something much darker. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I had advised countless colleagues to do during internal investigations. I stopped guessing. Every time my mind tried to fill in the missing pieces, I reminded myself that assumptions could be just as dangerous as lies. The evidence already told a story. I just didn't know whether it was the complete story. On Monday morning, I met Michael Sullivan for the first time. His office occupied the 5th floor of a renovated brick building near downtown Columbus. There were no oversized leather chairs or dramatic law books lining every wall like television portrayed. His conference room was simple, bright, and organized. A legal pad sat neatly beside a tablet computer. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "Miss Fernandez." "Please call me Genevieve. I've reviewed the preliminary information Rachel sent over." "You already have it. The bank requested your permission Friday afternoon." "I signed everything." "I know." He motioned toward the chair. "Let's start with one important question." I sat. "Do you want revenge?" The question caught me completely off guard. "No." He nodded once. "Good. Why?" "Because revenge makes people impatient." He folded his hands together. "Justice requires patience." I liked him immediately. For the next hour, Michael walked me through the legal side of my situation in language anyone could understand. "The bank's investigation has 2 purposes," he explained. "Recover the money, that's one. The other, determine whether the transactions were authorized. I already know they weren't." "You do." He smiled gently. "But the law requires evidence, not certainty." He drew 3 circles on his legal pad. The bank must answer 3 separate questions. He pointed to the first. Who accessed the account? The second. How did they obtain access? The third. Who ultimately benefited from the transfers? If they answer all 3, then responsibility becomes much easier to establish. I nodded. "What about my mother? What about her? If she really believed she was borrowing the money..." Michael didn't interrupt. "Does that matter legally? It may explain motive, but it doesn't erase unauthorized access." I looked down. "So, intentions don't change what happened." "Correct." He leaned back. "The law recognizes the difference between explanation and justification." That sentence stayed with me. For years, my family had blurred those 2 ideas together. Whenever Adrian made another reckless decision, there was always an explanation. Business was slow. A client refused to pay. Equipment broke. Someone else caused the problem. Eventually, explanations became excuses. Then excuses became expectations. Michael brought my attention back to the present. You also need to prepare yourself for something emotionally difficult. What? The evidence may not support the version of events you've already constructed. You mean my mother might be innocent? Possibly. And Adrian? Possibly. I frowned. I thought the transfers ended in his accounts. They did. But receiving money isn't always the same as planning a crime. His caution reminded me of Rachel. Neither professional seemed interested in reaching conclusions too early. They were following facts, nothing else. Before leaving, Michael gave me one piece of advice. When the investigation advances, someone in your family will almost certainly ask you for sympathy before accountability. What do I do? You can listen. He paused. You don't have to surrender your boundaries. That afternoon, I returned to the bank. Rachel was already waiting with several thick binders stacked neatly across the conference table. You've been busy, she smiled. We have. Aaron joined us a few minutes later, carrying another laptop. Rachel opened directly to a large flowchart. I think you're ready to see where the money actually went. I stared at the page. 5 transfers. Exactly as she'd described. Each left my savings account. Each first arrived in one of Adrian's business accounts. Then something unexpected happened. The money immediately left again. Wait! I leaned closer. It didn't stay there. No. Rachel traced the movement with a pen. Within hours. Another line. Sometimes within minutes. The money continued moving. Business account, loan servicer, commercial lender, equipment financing company, private creditor, mortgage servicing company, another lender, another payment, another account. The diagram looked less like theft and more like water flowing through a maze. Aaron enlarged one section. Our anti-money laundering software noticed something unusual. I thought AML systems looked for criminals hiding money. They do. So why did it flag this? Because the transaction behavior suddenly changed, he explained patiently. Most legitimate customers paid 1 or 2 recurring bills. Adrian's account suddenly received unusually large deposits. Then those deposits were rapidly divided among multiple creditors. No payroll, no supplier payments, no normal business expenses. Only debt, 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 debt. The software recognized the pattern as highly unusual. It didn't know whether the money was stolen. It simply knew the movement didn't resemble Adrian's normal financial behavior. So the software triggered the investigation. Rachel nodded. It generated the first alert. I looked again at the chart. Almost none of the money remained. It had disappeared into outstanding obligations. I felt strangely disappointed. Not because I expected to recover cash from Adrian, because I realized he truly had been drowning. Rachel turned another page. We reconstructed every transfer. The timeline showed exact dates, exact hours, exact amounts. Each transfer happened during normal weekday business hours. Never late at night, never weekends. Whoever initiated them understood when automated monitoring was least likely to notice unusual activity immediately. Again, patience, planning, not panic. Rachel pointed toward another highlighted section. This is important. One payment totaled nearly $68,000. What's special about that one? It didn't go to your brother. It didn't. She shook her head. It paid off a loan. So, the borrower wasn't Adrian. Silence. Rachel waited for me to read the document myself. Borrower Patricia Fernandez. I blinked. Co-borrower Adrian Fernandez. My chest tightened. I don't understand. Rachel slid over another file. Several years earlier, Patricia had personally guaranteed one of Adrian's business expansion loans. When his company stopped making payments, the lender began pursuing both of them. Interest accumulated, penalties increased, collection letters followed. Eventually, Patricia herself became legally responsible. The realization hit me all at once. She hadn't only been trying to save Adrian, she'd also been trying to save herself. Everything suddenly looked different. Not better. Different. Rachel seemed to understand exactly what I was thinking. This doesn't excuse what happened. I know. But motive matters. I stared at Patricia's loan documents. The woman I'd always known as cautious, responsible, organized, had quietly tied her own financial future to Adrian's business years earlier. And when that decision collapsed, she reached into mine. Aaron opened another document. We also located correspondence between the lender and your mother. He couldn't show me every email yet. Some were still part of the investigation. But he summarized them carefully. Repeated payment demands, warnings, deadlines, threats of legal collection, potential lawsuits. One sentence stood out. Failure to cure default may result in collection proceedings against all guarantors. I looked away from the screen. I finally understood the panic hidden beneath my mother's recent behavior, the questions, the nervous smiles, the forced optimism. She hadn't simply been worried about Adrian losing his business. She had been watching her own financial life collapse beside his. Rachel closed the folder. I know this is difficult. It is. But we're getting closer. I nodded slowly. So my mother had a reason. Yes. A desperate one. Yes. But we still don't know whether Adrian knew exactly where the money came from. She answered carefully. Not yet. That distinction mattered. Perhaps more than I wanted to admit, because if Adrian truly believed Patricia had emptied her retirement savings, then this story wasn't finished. It was about to become much more complicated. As I gathered my things to leave, Rachel stopped me. Our forensic team finished examining your old laptop this morning. I froze. And she held my eyes for several seconds. We found something that completely changes how we understand access to your account. I stopped halfway to the conference room door. Rachel rarely spoke dramatically. During every meeting we'd had, she presented facts one piece at a time, never exaggerating, never rushing to conclusions. So when she said the laptop findings changed the investigation, I knew she meant exactly that. I slowly sat back down. Aaron reopened his laptop. On the screen appeared a photograph of my old silver computer sitting inside the bank's digital forensics lab. It turned out to be more important than we expected, he said. What did you find? He clicked through several images. The browser still contained saved login information. I closed my eyes. I knew it. Not quite. I looked up again. The passwords themselves weren't stored. They weren't. No. He zoomed into another report. What remained were browser cookies, autofill records, saved usernames, and several synchronization files. Rachel noticed the confusion on my face. In simple terms, she explained, the laptop remembered enough information to make it much easier for someone to recover access to your online accounts. Aaron nodded, especially if that person already knew basic information about you. My birthday. Yes. My childhood address. Yes. My security questions. Exactly. The room became quiet. I thought back to every conversation with my mother over the previous months. The questions about my bank, the questions about buying a house, borrowing the laptop, taking it home, returning it without mentioning any problems. It all fit together with painful precision. Aaron continued, We also recovered internet history. I swallowed. Was my bank accessed? Yes. More than once. He turned the monitor toward me. 7 visits, spread across 4 days. Each session lasted only a few minutes. No transfers yet. Only login attempts, password recovery pages, security settings. Then on the 5th day, success. Rachel spoke softly. The first successful account recovery occurred less than 24 hours after your mother returned the laptop. I looked down at my hands. There was no anger in that moment, only sadness. The investigation had moved beyond suspicion. My mother's actions had become part of the evidence. Rachel closed the report. We'll continue documenting everything. I nodded mechanically. Thank you. She hesitated. I know what comes next is difficult. What? You'll probably want answers from your mother. I do. If you choose to speak with her, she paused. Listen more than you talk. That advice stayed with me the entire drive to my parents' house. 2 evenings later, I stood outside of the front door where I'd spent most of my childhood. For nearly a full minute, I couldn't bring myself to knock. Eventually, I did. My mother answered, wearing a faded blue cardigan I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years earlier. Her smile appeared automatically. Then she saw my face. What happened? We need to talk. She stepped aside without asking another question. The house felt unusually quiet. No, Adrian. He's meeting with someone. She sounded distracted. Good. I hadn't wanted him there. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd helped me with spelling homework. The same table where she'd celebrated every birthday. The same table where she'd apparently decided my future could become someone else's rescue plan. I placed my folder gently between us. I met with the bank. Her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Oh, they've been investigating my missing savings. She didn't answer. They know exactly how someone entered my account. Still nothing. They examined my old laptop. For the first time, she looked away. Not for long. Just long enough, I noticed. I have something I need to ask you. She nodded slowly. Did you use my laptop to access my online banking? Silence. Several seconds passed. Then she laughed, a nervous laugh. Genevieve? No. I kept my voice calm. Please don't answer the question you wish I'd asked. She looked back at me. I'm asking exactly one thing. Another long silence. Finally, she whispered. I only looked. I felt something inside me crack. You looked. I wanted to see what? Whether you really had enough. My throat tightened. You didn't trust me. It wasn't about trust. What was it about? Her eyes filled with tears. I was terrified. I had imagined this conversation 100 different ways. In none of them did my mother look quite so exhausted. She suddenly appeared years older than she had the week before. I didn't know what else to do. What happened after you looked? She lowered her head. I found more than I expected. The balance. She nodded. I couldn't believe how much you'd saved. I waited. I kept telling myself. She stopped. What? That I would put it back. The words hung in the air between us. You transferred my money. She began crying. I never wanted to steal from you. You did. I was borrowing it. You never asked. I couldn't. Why? Because you would have said no. I answered immediately. You're right. That seemed to hurt her more than if I'd shouted. She covered her face. I thought Adrian only needed time. How much time? A few months. The first transfer happened almost 2 months before the bank discovered it. I know. The second. She nodded. The third. More tears. The fourth. She couldn't speak anymore. The fifth. Finally, she whispered. I know. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the transfer timeline. I didn't slide them toward her. She already knew what they'd say. Instead, I asked something else. When exactly did you decide my future belonged to someone else? She looked horrified. I never thought about it that way. But that's what happened. She stared at the table. I thought if Adrian lost everything, I interrupted gently, this wasn't about him anymore. She closed her eyes. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. She remained silent. After several moments, she stood and walked into the hallway. When she returned, she carried a thick spiral notebook, the same one I'd seen in the storage room. She placed it in front of me. I was keeping track. I opened it. Every transfer, every payment, every loan, every amount she believed she would someday repay, beside nearly every entry she'd written, pay Genevieve back. Some pages included calculations, projected repayment dates, interest estimates, possible refinancing plans. She hadn't spent weeks creating it. She'd spent months. I turned another page, then another. Everything was organized, methodical, almost obsessive. It wasn't the notebook of someone celebrating stolen money. It was the notebook of someone drowning while trying to convince herself she could eventually undo the damage. I never stopped planning to repay you. I believed her. Oddly, that realization made everything worse, because believing her intentions didn't erase the choices she'd made. I closed the notebook carefully. The bank also found lender emails. She didn't look surprised. They know about your guaranteed loans. A fresh wave of tears appeared. I never should have signed for Adrian. No. I kept thinking if I helped him one more time. She couldn't finish. I finished it for her. Everything would finally work out. She nodded. I kept choosing hope over reality. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Did Adrian know? She answered so quickly it almost startled me. No. You expect me to believe that he knew I was trying to help. Did he know where the money came from? She shook her head violently. I swear he didn't. I searched her face. For years, my career had depended on recognizing when people were hiding something. I watched their eyes, their breathing, their timing. Patricia looked devastated, ashamed, broken, but not deceptive. She leaned across the table. Genevieve! What? If Adrian had known? She swallowed. He would have stopped me. I wanted to believe that. Part of me even did. But another part remembered every loan, every bailout, every excuse, every time Adrian accepted help without asking how much it cost someone else. I stood. I'm leaving. She grabbed my... Please. I stopped. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't answer. I know I may never earn your trust again. Still nothing. But please... Her voice broke completely. Don't let this destroy what's left of our family. I gently pulled my hand away. I didn't destroy it. For the first time in my life, my mother had no response. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated. It was Rachel. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening, she said. You didn't. We've completed another interview. With who? There was a brief pause. Your brother. My heartbeat quickened. And Genevieve? Yes. His statement doesn't match your mother's. Rachel's words stayed with me the entire drive home. His statement doesn't match your mother's. I replayed that sentence over and over, trying not to jump ahead of the facts. Maybe Adrian had remembered dates differently. Maybe he misunderstood the investigator's questions. Maybe he had been embarrassed and minimized his financial situation. There were dozens of innocent explanations. But after everything I'd learned over the previous week, I had stopped believing in convenient explanations. The next morning, Rachel called again. "Would you be willing to meet your brother today?" "Is that part of the investigation?" "No." "So why?" She answered carefully. "Because we've reached the point where hearing his version directly may help you make informed decisions later." "You're not telling me what he said? I can't." "I understand." She paused. "One more thing." "Yes. If you meet him, don't accuse him of crimes." "I won't. Just ask questions." That sounded familiar. It was exactly what she'd told me about my mother. Listen more than you speak. Observe more than you assume. I agreed to meet Adrian that afternoon. He chose a small coffee shop halfway between our apartments. When I arrived, he was already sitting near the window. He looked worse than he had at our parents' house. His shoulders slumped. His eyes were bloodshot. He stood when he saw me. "Thanks for coming." I nodded. Neither of us hugged. Neither of us smiled. After ordering coffee, we sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence. Finally, he spoke. "Mom told me you know." "I know a lot." He rubbed both hands together. "I've been trying to figure out what to say." "Then don't rehearse anything." He looked at me. "Just tell me the truth." For nearly 30 seconds, he stared into his coffee. "I never wanted this." I didn't respond. "I know that sounds meaningless." "It does." He nodded slowly. "I deserve that." There was something different about him. For the first time in years, Adrian wasn't trying to charm his way through a difficult conversation. He looked tired. Completely tired. I decided to begin with the simplest question. "When did you realize Mom was helping you?" He sighed. "She started making payments a couple months ago." "What did she tell you? That she'd found a way?" "What way?" "She wouldn't say." "And you never asked?" His silence answered before he did. Eventually, he admitted, "I asked once." "What happened?" "She told me not to worry about it." "And you accepted that?" "I wanted to." The honesty surprised me. "You wanted to—" I was drowning Jen boy. He hadn't called me Jen since we were teenagers. "I couldn't make payroll." "I know." "I couldn't pay suppliers." "I know." "I was getting sued." "I know." His head snapped up. "You know. I've seen the collection notices." He closed his eyes. "So Mom really didn't hide them very well." "No." He let out a long breath. "I honestly thought she'd emptied her retirement account." I watched him carefully. "That's what you believed." "Yes." "You never questioned how she suddenly had nearly $200,000. I knew she had savings. Not that much." I wasn't thinking clearly. I believed that part. Desperate people often accepted impossible answers because impossible answers felt better than unbearable ones. But something still bothered me. "You own a construction company." "I used to." "You negotiated contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." He nodded. "So you're telling me you never once asked where exactly $184,000 came from?" He looked away. "No." "Why?" His answer came quietly. "Because I was afraid of the answer." That sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because it cleared him, because it didn't. It explained his silence. It didn't excuse it. I reached into my folder and removed a copy of the transfer timeline. "I've seen everything." His eyes widened. "The bank has all of it." "Yes." He slowly nodded. "I figured they would eventually." "So tell me something." "What?" "When Mom said she'd found a way," he already knew where I was going. "What did you think she meant?" He swallowed. "I thought maybe she'd borrowed against the house. And maybe refinanced. And maybe taken money from investments. You never believed she might have taken mine." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I hope she hadn't. Hope. That word again. My mother had hoped everything would somehow work out. Adrian had hoped he wouldn't have to ask difficult questions. Both of them had built decisions on hope instead of truth. I folded my hands together. Hope isn't an answer. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. He looked genuinely confused. If you really believed Mom had emptied her retirement account, I did. Why did you keep accepting payment after payment? His expression changed. The confidence disappeared. The excuses disappeared. For several long seconds, he simply sat there. Finally, he admitted, because every payment bought me another week. He looked ashamed. I kept telling myself I'd fix everything before anyone got hurt. And I never did. The silence between us grew heavy. Then I asked the question Rachel had quietly prepared me to ask. Did you ever tell Mom to find money? He immediately shook his head. No. Are you sure? Yes. I watched him. His breathing remained steady. His eyes stayed on mine. Then I remembered something Michael Sullivan had told me. Sometimes people answer the question you asked while avoiding the one that matters. So I asked differently. Did you ever tell Mom she had to solve the problem no matter what? His eyes dropped. That tiny movement lasted less than a second, but I caught it. Adrian. He rubbed his forehead. What exactly did you say? He didn't answer. Tell me. Finally, he whispered. I told her. Another pause. I didn't care how she did it. Every sound inside the coffee shop seemed to disappear. I said if we missed another payment. He swallowed hard. Everything would collapse. What were your exact words? He looked like he wished he could erase the memory. I said. He took a shaky breath. Mom, I don't care where the money comes from anymore. Just figure something out. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not an instruction, not a direct order, but permission. Permission to stop asking ethical questions. Permission to replace principles with desperation. He looked at me helplessly. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. I never told her to steal from you. I believe that. He blinked. You do. Yes. But you also made it easier for her to convince herself she had no choice. His shoulders collapsed. I know. No. I looked directly at him. I think today is the first time you actually know. He began crying quietly, not dramatically, not loudly, just the exhausted tears of someone who had finally run out of ways to defend himself. I ruined everything. You didn't ruin everything. He looked up hopefully. I finished the sentence. You ruined what we used to have. His face fell. I don't know how to fix this. I don't either. A server walked by and silently refilled our coffee cups before leaving again. Neither of us touched them. After several minutes, Adrian reached into his backpack. I brought something. He handed me a folder. Inside were loan payoff confirmations, business account statements, creditor receipts, every payment my stolen savings had covered. I've already given copies to the investigators. I nodded. I know. I wanted you to have them too. I continued turning pages. Near the back of the folder sat several printed text messages between Adrian and our mother. One exchange caught my attention immediately. Patricia, I found another way. Adrian, are you sure? Patricia, don't ask questions right now. Adrian? Okay. Nothing about the messages mentioned me. Nothing mentioned my bank account. But what came next froze me. Another text sent 2 days later. Adrian, whatever you did, thank you. I'll make this right someday. I looked up. You kept this. I never deleted anything. Why? I thought someday I'd need to explain myself. I closed the folder. I think you will. As I stood to leave, my phone vibrated. Rachel. I answered immediately. Genevieve, we've completed the final forensic review. I glanced at Adri. What did you find? Rachel's voice remained calm. We recovered deleted messages from another device. My stomach tightened. And they answer the one question none of us could fully resolve. I stepped outside the coffee shop before continuing the call. The afternoon traffic rolled past without my noticing. People crossed the street carrying grocery bags, laughing with friends, living perfectly ordinary lives. Mine no longer felt ordinary. What did you recover? I asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. We'd rather discuss it in person. I don't think I can wait. I understand. There was a brief pause, but I don't want a single sentence taken out of context. This evidence deserves the full explanation. I looked back through the cafe window. Adrian was still sitting alone, staring into his untouched coffee. I'll come now. We'll be ready. An hour later, I was back inside the bank's investigation office. This time, the atmosphere felt different. The conference table held only one binder. No stacks of documents, no scattered reports. Just one neatly organized case file. Michael Sullivan was already there. Rachel stood as I entered. Thank you for coming. I sat down quietly. Rachel placed both hands on the binder. This is our final forensic report. For months, this investigation had been a collection of unanswered questions. Now every page represented an answer. Rachel opened the report. We'll review the conclusions one section at a time. I nodded. First. She slid over a summary page. Unauthorized account access confirmed. The bank has formally determined that you did not authorize the recovery email, authentication changes, or the 5 outgoing transfers. Even though I already knew that seeing the words in writing felt strangely emotional. It wasn't just my belief anymore. It was an official finding. Rachel continued. Second, another page. Digital device analysis. Aaron joined the conversation. We examined your old laptop. He summarized everything we'd already discussed. Saved browser data, authentication cookies, recovery information, internet history. Nothing new there. Then he added something I hadn't heard before. We also recovered deleted browser sessions. I looked up. Deleted. Someone attempted to erase browsing history before returning the laptop. So they knew. Yes. They knew they'd accessed my account. Correct. Rachel spoke gently. The deletion attempts actually strengthened the forensic evidence. I let out a slow breath. Every effort to hide the truth had preserved another trail instead. Rachel turned another page. Voice authentication review. Our forensic audio analysts compared the customer service recordings. She didn't dramatize the conclusion. The caller was identified with high confidence as Patricia Fernandez. I closed my eyes for a moment. Even after her confession, seeing it confirmed officially hurt in a different way. Rachel continued carefully. Your mother's own admission aligned with the digital evidence. Michael added quietly. That consistency matters legally. I nodded. I understand. Rachel moved to the next section. Financial flow reconstruction. A color-coded chart covered nearly 2 pages. Every dollar was accounted for. Transfer 1, transfer 2, transfer 3, transfer 4, transfer 5, every payment, every creditor, every destination. Nothing remained unexplained. Aaron pointed toward the bottom. 96% of the transferred funds went directly to creditors. So almost nothing was spent on lifestyle. Correct. No vacations. No. No luxury purchases. No. No hidden investment accounts. No. The money hadn't disappeared into greed, it had disappeared into debt. That distinction mattered, not because it erased responsibility, because it explained motive with remarkable clarity. Rachel turned another page. This is the section you were waiting for. At the top appeared the words, Recovered Communications Analysis. I immediately thought about Adrian. Rachel seemed to know. The deleted messages answered several remaining questions. She summarized them carefully. The investigators had recovered deleted text conversations from Patricia's phone through a lawful forensic extraction. Most were exactly what I expected. Conversations with lenders, payment reminders, collection notices. Then came the messages between Patricia and Adrian. Many matched the copies Adrian had already given me. Others had been deleted before investigators recovered them. Rachel looked directly at me. We found no message where Adrian instructed your mother to access your accounts. I stayed silent. We found no evidence he knew your savings account had been compromised before the transfers occurred. Again, silence. But there it was, the word every investigator seemed to use. We did find repeated messages showing he understood your mother was obtaining money through undisclosed means. She read one aloud. Patricia, please don't ask where it's coming from. Adrian, I won't. Another. Patricia, just let me handle it. Adrian, okay. Another. Adrian, I can't lose everything. Then one final message. It had been sent only hours before the last transfer. Patricia, promise me you won't ask questions until this is over. Adrian, I promise. Rachel closed the file. There is no evidence Adrian participated in accessing your account. I nodded slowly, but he knowingly accepted significant financial assistance while deliberately avoiding information about its source. That's correct. Michael folded his hands. In legal terms, he chose his words carefully. Those are two different levels of responsibility. I already understood. My mother had committed the unauthorized access. Adrian had chosen deliberate ignorance because learning the truth might have required him to stop accepting help. Neither position was defensible. They simply weren't identical. Rachel reached the final section, bank resolution. She slid the letter toward me. Our reimbursement committee completed its review yesterday. I read the first paragraph, then the second. By the third, my vision blurred. Rachel waited patiently. Finally, I looked up. The bank? She smiled. Whitey will reimburse the full amount of your documented loss. I couldn't speak. The decision was based on several factors. She listed them one by one. The fraud had been reported promptly. The forensic evidence clearly established unauthorized account access. Genevieve had not acted negligently. The transaction pattern triggered internal fraud monitoring. The investigation confirmed financial exploitation by a trusted individual. Every requirement had been satisfied. I looked down again at the letter. For weeks, I had focused so completely on betrayal that I'd almost forgotten the practical question. Would I ever recover my savings now I knew? Yes, the money would return, but nothing else would. Rachel's voice softened. I know this isn't the ending you wanted. No. But I hope it gives you a future. It does. Michael spoke next. There's one final decision. He opened his own folder. Inside lay several legal documents. He placed them carefully in front of me. One page authorized cooperation with potential criminal prosecution. Another outlined civil restitution options. Another summarized possible outcomes. He didn't push me. He simply explained, "You are under no obligation to decide today." Rachel agreed. "Take your time." I looked at the documents, then at Rachel, then at Michael. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside me since I'd confronted my mother. If I choose not to pursue criminal charges, Michael answered, that does not erase what happened. If I choose civil enforcement, repayment obligations can still be legally enforced. And if they violate those agreements, he didn't hesitate, then criminal referral remains available. I looked again at the papers. For weeks, I had imagined justice as one dramatic moment. A courtroom, a verdict, someone being declared guilty. Instead, justice had arrived quietly. One report, one investigation, one series of documented facts. No shouting, no revenge, just evidence. Michael gently closed the folder. I recommend one more conversation before you sign anything. My family. He nodded. They deserve to hear the truth directly. Rachel stood. As investigators, our work is essentially complete. She extended her hand. It has been a privilege helping you. I shook it. No. I smiled for the first time in weeks. You helped me when I couldn't even trust my own instincts anymore. As I left the conference room carrying the reimbursement letter and the legal documents, I realized the next meeting would not take place inside a bank. It would happen around the same dining room table where my family had shared birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Sunday dinners for decades. Only this time, every seat at that table would be occupied by the truth. 3 days later, I invited my mother and Adrian to my apartment. Not my parents' house. Not a restaurant. Not Michael's office. My apartment. For the first time since the investigation began, I wanted the conversation to happen in a space that belonged to me. Neither of them argued about the location. They arrived 10 minutes apart. My mother carried a small container. I made your favorite chicken and rice. I looked at it for a moment before taking it from her. Thank you. I placed it in the refrigerator without opening it. Some habits survived even after trust disappeared. Adrian stood awkwardly near the entryway. I almost didn't come. I know, but you did. He nodded. Neither of us knew whether that counted for much. A few minutes later, Michael Sullivan arrived. I had asked him to attend not as my attorney in a courtroom, but as someone who could explain the legal documents clearly if emotions overtook facts. He shook everyone's hand politely before sitting at my dining table. No one touched the coffee I'd prepared. No one seemed interested in anything except why we were there. I placed a single folder in the center of the table. This is the complete investigation. No one reached for it, so I opened it myself. I asked you here because I don't want anyone leaving this room believing the story is based on assumptions. I looked first at my mother. Rachel and her team reconstructed every transfer. Then Adrian. They examined my laptop. Another page. They identified the customer service calls. Another. They followed every dollar. No one interrupted. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming behind us. I turned the first document toward them. The reimbursement approval letter. The bank determined that I never authorized any of the transfers. My mother's shoulders sank. I know, I continued. The investigation confirmed unauthorized access to my account. She nodded silently. I placed another document beside it. The digital timeline, every login, every recovery change, every authentication modification, every transfer. I watched Adrian study the pages. His face slowly lost what little color remained. I never knew it was this detailed, he whispered. It is. Michael finally spoke. Digital investigations rarely depend on one piece of evidence. He pointed toward the timeline. They depend on hundreds of small pieces that support one another. Neither Patricia nor Adrian argued. There was nothing left to argue with. I opened the next section. The financial flow chart, Colored lines traced every dollar from my savings account through Adrian's business accounts and into his creditors. I wanted both of you to see this. Adrian stared at it for a long time. So, he swallowed. Almost none of it actually stayed with me. No. I thought... He stopped. What? I guess part of me imagined there was still money somewhere. There isn't. He nodded slowly. I know. For several moments, everyone simply looked at the documents. Then my mother quietly said, I've apologized. I looked at her. You have. I'll keep apologizing for the rest of my life. I believe you. Fresh tears filled her eyes. But an apology can't become another way of asking me to carry your burden. She lowered her head. I understand. I wasn't sure she truly did. Not yet. I reached into the folder again. This time I removed a different packet. Court-approved civil restitution documents. Michael slid them toward Patricia and Adrian. I've reviewed these with Genevieve. He spoke calmly. They create legally enforceable repayment obligations. Adrian looked up. So she's suing us? I answered before Michael could. No. He looked confused. I'm protecting myself. There was a difference. Michael explained the agreement in plain language. The reimbursement from the bank restored my immediate financial loss. But under the restitution agreement, Patricia and Adrian acknowledged responsibility for the unauthorized transfers and agreed to repay the bank according to any future recovery rights the institution might exercise. Separate provisions required them to reimburse investigative expenses if ordered and prohibited either of them from seeking future financial assistance from me through informal family arrangements. Everything would exist in writing. Everything would be enforceable. No verbal promises, no I'll pay you back later, no emotional negotiations during holidays, no blurred boundaries. Adrian looked at the papers. So if we miss payments, Michael answered, the legal consequences become significantly more serious. Patricia quietly signed first. She didn't read every page. She had already told me 2 days earlier that she intended to accept whatever accountability remained. Adrian took much longer. He read every paragraph, every clause, every signature line. Finally, he looked at me. Do you really think I'd ever ask you for money again? I held his eyes. I never thought you'd accept money that belonged to me. He looked away. A few seconds later, he signed. Michael witnessed each signature before placing the documents back into his folder. The legal portion of the meeting was over. The emotional part wasn't. Patricia reached into her purse. I brought something else. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph. It showed Adrian and me sitting on the hood of our father's pickup truck when I was about 8 years old. I remembered that day. We had gone fishing. Neither of us had caught anything, but we'd laughed the entire afternoon. My mother smiled sadly. I found it while cleaning. I studied the picture, then carefully slid it back into the envelope. I'll keep it. Her expression softened. Thank you. But, I looked directly at her. It doesn't change today. She nodded immediately. I know. And I need both of you to hear something clearly. Patricia and Adrian looked at me. I forgive you. Both of them froze. My mother began crying again. Adrian closed his eyes. Before either of them could speak, I continued. Forgiveness is for my peace. I paused. It is not permission. The room became perfectly still. I'm changing every account. I looked toward Patricia. You will never again have access to my passwords. Then Adrian. You will never again borrow money from me. Back to both of them. I will never co-sign a loan. I will never guarantee debt. I will never become anyone's emergency plan. No one argued. They couldn't. Because for the first time in my life, those weren't emotional reactions, they were boundaries. Clear, simple, permanent. Patricia wiped away her tears. I don't deserve another chance. I answered honestly. Not financially. She nodded. What about someday? I understood what she was really asking. Would we ever feel like family again? I don't know. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply true. Healing didn't follow calendars. Trust couldn't be rebuilt because everyone wished hard enough. It would take years, maybe longer, perhaps never. As everyone stood to leave, Adrian stopped beside the front door. I started working again. I looked up. Doing what? I'm managing projects for another construction company. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. No ownership. No loans. No shortcuts. I nodded. I hope it works. I do too. After they left, the apartment became unbelievably quiet. I gathered the empty coffee cups from the table. 3 had barely been touched. 1 belonged to me. As I carried them into the kitchen, I noticed a large white envelope resting against my front door. I hadn't seen it earlier. There was no return address. Only my name. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single letter from the bank. Across the top in bold letters were the words, Final Case Closure. I stood there holding the envelope for a long moment. The investigation was officially ending. The harder part learning how to live after it was only beginning. I didn't open the envelope right away. For weeks, every letter from the bank had brought another difficult truth, another piece of evidence, another conversation I never imagined having. This one felt different. I carried it to my kitchen table, made a cup of coffee, and sat down alone. Morning sunlight filtered through the window, landing across the stack of documents that had occupied my dining table for nearly 2 months. Investigation reports, legal agreements, property listings, mortgage pre-approval paperwork. Somehow they all belonged to the same chapter of my life. I carefully broke the seal. The first page was exactly what the front of the envelope promised. Final case closure. The investigation had officially concluded. The bank had completed reimbursement. Every disputed transaction had been documented. Every piece of forensic evidence had been preserved. The case would remain available should future legal proceedings ever become necessary, but from the bank's perspective, their work was finished. Near the bottom was a handwritten note. Not required, not formal, simply handwritten. Ms. Fernandez, thank you for your patience and professionalism throughout this investigation. I hope your next chapter is defined by the future you've worked so hard to build rather than what someone tried to take from you. Wishing you peace. Rachel Mitchell. I read it twice. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to reread evidence. There wasn't any mystery left, only decisions. 2 weeks later, I stood inside a completely different building, a title company. The closing agent smiled as she arranged papers neatly across the conference table. Congratulations, Ms. Fernandez. I smiled back. Thank you. She pointed toward the first signature line. This finalizes the purchase of your home. I picked up the pen. Months earlier, I had been terrified that someone else's choices had permanently stolen my future. Now, because the investigation had uncovered the truth, because the bank had honored its responsibilities, and because I had refused to surrender to panic, I was finally signing the documents I'd dreamed about long before any of this happened. The process took less than an hour. When everything was complete, the closing agent slid a small ring of keys across the table. Welcome home. They weren't expensive keys. There was nothing symbolic engraved on them. Still, I stared at them longer than I expected. Not because they opened a beautiful house, because no one had given it to me. No one had rescued me. No one had sacrificed for me. I had earned it. Outside, I sat in my car for several minutes before driving to the property. The house wasn't large. A 2-bedroom craftsman with white siding, a covered front porch, maple trees in the backyard, and enough room for a future home office. Exactly what I'd hoped for months before everything fell apart. As I unlocked the front door, the empty rooms echoed softly. Most people might have seen bare walls. I saw possibility. The first evening, I unfolded a lawn chair in the living room because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. I ordered takeout. A cheeseburger, French fries, and chocolate pie. Nothing fancy, just dinner in my own home. It was strangely perfect. Life didn't magically become easy. Healing never does. Over the following 6 months, Patricia kept every appointment with the therapist she had chosen shortly after our confrontation. She never asked me to attend. She never asked me to forgive her again. Instead, she allowed actions to replace promises. Every few weeks, she mailed me a handwritten note. Not long letters, never requests, never explanations. Usually just updates. Thinking of you today. I hope work is going well. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. Both became acceptable. Adrian also changed in ways I hadn't expected. He stayed with the construction company. He stopped talking about becoming wealthy overnight. Stopped chasing impossible opportunities. Stopped believing every setback required another desperate gamble. Through the court-approved repayment process, he met every obligation on time. Not because I reminded him, because he finally understood that responsibility wasn't measured by intentions. It was measured by actions. Our relationship remained polite. Occasionally, we met for lunch. We talked about baseball, movies, work, almost never about money. Some conversations ended after 30 minutes. Some lasted 2 hours. Trust wasn't returning. Something different was growing. Respect. It turned out respect was quieter than trust. Less emotional, more consistent. And for where we were, it was enough. As for me, I made changes that reached far beyond passwords. I updated every financial account, changed banks, purchased identity monitoring, stored important documents in a secure safe, created emergency contacts who weren't family members. None of those decisions came from fear. They came from experience. One afternoon, almost 8 months after Rachel's first phone call, she invited me to coffee. Not as an investigator, just as someone who wanted to see how I was doing. We met near the same bank branch where this journey had begun. She smiled as I walked in. You look different. I feel different. In a good way. I thought about it. Stronger. She laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent nearly an hour talking not about the investigation, but about ordinary life. Travel, books, her teenage daughter applying to college, my new vegetable garden that was somehow producing more tomatoes than I knew what to do with. As we stood to leave, I thanked her for believing me. She looked surprised. I didn't do anything unusual. You did. How? The first day we spoke, I smiled. You treated me like someone searching for the truth, instead of someone who had to prove she deserved it. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. Evidence tells us what happened. She picked up her purse. But how we treat people while we search for that evidence, that part is always a choice. I watched her walk toward the parking lot. Then I looked up at the bright Ohio sky. Months earlier, I'd believed the worst thing that had happened to me was losing $184,000. I was wrong. The worst loss would have been believing that love required unlimited access, that family deserved trust without accountability, that protecting peace meant remaining silent. Instead, I learned something much more valuable. Boundaries aren't walls built to keep people out. They're doors with locks. The people who respect you will knock. The people who don't will complain that the door is no longer open. I still loved my mother. I still hoped my brother continued rebuilding his life. But neither of them knew my passwords. Neither of them had access to my accounts. Neither of them would ever again carry the responsibility that belonged only to me. Not because I was bitter, because I had finally learned the difference between forgiveness and permission. And that lesson became the strongest foundation my new home could ever have. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust without question. When that trust is broken, it's natural to wonder whether forgiveness means returning to the way things were. In my experience, it doesn't. Healthy boundaries are not punishment. They are a way of protecting the future you've worked hard to build. You can choose compassion without giving someone unlimited access to your finances, your home, or your peace of mind. Accountability and forgiveness can exist together, but accountability must come first if trust is ever going to have a chance to grow again. If you've ever been taken advantage of by someone you loved, I hope this story reminds you that asking for honesty, setting clear limits, and using the law when necessary are not acts of revenge. They are acts of self-respect. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? How did it change your life? Share your experience in the comments, because someone else reading it may need that encouragement today. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family justice, resilience, and healing, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined me for the next one. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.